Welcome to Spirituality Step by Step. I'm Dan Wigner. I'd like to talk to you today about one of the spiritual practices listed on the website. If you come to Spirituality Step by Step and in the menu, click on Spiritual Practices or scroll down to Featured Content, Spiritual Practices is also connected right here in the middle. If you click on that, it'll lead you to the Spiritual Practices page, and you'll have a long list of spiritual practices that are selected from my more expanded versions and many more practices in my book, Just Begin, a Source Book of Spiritual Practices. Let's choose Lectio Divina. Lectio Divina is a foundational Christian spiritual practice that has been used in varying forms since almost the beginning of the faith. What does it consist of? You can see in a brief definition here that Lectio Divina is the Christian spiritual practice that has been most closely associated with reading the Bible or other sacred literature. And while there are many complex, interesting, and beautiful variations on that, succinctly put, Lectio Divina consists of multiple readings of a short passage of scripture or some spiritual book in order to listen for what God may be telling you or me or any one of us through that story, that passage, that section. And as you'll see on the website, spiritualitystepbystep.com, I have distilled that Lectio Divina process into 4 steps to get you started so that you can just begin. Now, these correspond to actual movements within Lectio Divina proper and have Latin names associated with them, which will show you kind of the age of the practice. The first stage is the one principally called Lectio. Lectio is Latin for reading. So it is picking a scripture passage or passage from a spiritual book and reading it, but reading it slowly in order to let it kind of wash over you, because you're going to read it multiple times. You're not necessarily trying to get the original meaning, the most literal meaning, the easiest devotional insight. That's not why you're reading it. You're reading it slowly to let it wash over you. And you may stay in the first stage of just reading it, read it several times, before you move to the second stage, oratio, where we get the word oration. And in this stage, you read it out loud. Now, you might want to be in a space where you can have some privacy in order to read it out loud. You also could read it very quietly to yourself, where only you can hear yourself reading it out loud and someone else might not. As you read it, focus on what God is saying to you. Look for a specific word or phrase that stands out to you. That's often in the literature surrounding Lectio Divina. It's said that something that shimmers to you, something that just is different, unique this time. Maybe as you're reading it out loud, you mistakenly give more emphasis to this word. Maybe it just is where your eye is drawn when you first read it on the page. It can be any word and any phrase. And even if nothing stands out, that also is a valuable result of Lectio Divina. That's something that you can meditate on as well. And that is the third stage. The third stage, which you move into meditatio, is you've read it out loud, some phrase, word, or perhaps nothing, maybe an image too, so all sorts of things stand out to you. So you take that away from the text and you concentrate on that word or phrase as it stood out to you. Now, this is usually where the formal practice at any specific given period of time might end. And what you're supposed to do is take that word, phrase, image, whatever, take it with you throughout the day, maybe for multiple days, maybe even for multiple weeks if it strikes you that way. And then the fourth stage is a stage that you'll see here. It's called contemplatio. It's the word we get contemplation from. And in Christian spirituality, contemplation is the word given to that moment when God meets the individual. It's not something that I can control, that you can control, that anyone can control other than God. But as you've been meditating on that word or phrase, you've been preparing yourself to listen. Because sometimes God speaks in very fantastic ways, like burning bushes. But often it's in very subtle ways that we have to prepare ourselves to listen for. And that's what the practice of Lectio Divina is meant to do. It's that slow, repetitive practice of building our spiritual listening skills through working with scripture or some other spiritual book. So now you have the method, you have enough to just begin. So let's just begin with Lectio Divina.